I know what you're thinking. What in the gosh darn is Bits and Bombs? Bits and Bombs is a podcast deep diving into what it takes to do stand-up from a different comedian every episode. Follow new open micer Peter Doms in his journey to be an okay comic.
Right, so
Yes.
Greg Sullivan.
Hi, Pete. How you going?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Before we start, I
Yes.
should say content warning.
Yeah.
I don't know. We're going to have an unfettered chat,
Yeah.
so I'm pretty much a walking content warning. So probably, if you're going to listen to this or watch it, probably best to have someone that you love nearby, or ideally a trained therapist, so that you can talk things through. Just remember, Lifeline's always available.
So it's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a nice light note to kick
Yeah, just a
things
light
off
note. It
on.
saves me from doing like a little 30-second
Yeah.
recording.
Content warning.
Yeah.
Everything you don't want to think about has happened to Greg.
So Greg, when was your first gig?
It depends on your definition.
Or just even like your first like public speaking?
Public speaking. Well, my year 9 English teacher, Mrs. Schick, was very kind, and she knew that she basically humoured my show-off tendencies, and she let me do some stuff in front of the class in year 9. So I guess that would be the first, which was just me doing some bits that I'd seen Franklin and Jai do on Hey Hey It's Saturday.
Oh, yeah.
And I just added a couple of tags. So, yeah, I was a hack. Hopefully was a hack. But I was adding some of my own stuff in.
Mm-hmm.
And then at first year of uni, there was a talent competition, and I went in that and won a carton of beer just doing the fat jokes. Or that might have been second year of uni. I'm not sure. I don't know when but my first So, but I also met Vince Sorrenti when I was at uni, and talking to him before he was doing a show for the Psychology Association at my uni. And I was talking to him, and I was so keen and nerdy about comedy. He said, "You want to do comedy?" And I said, "Yeah."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Do you want to do 5 before my show?" And I went, "Okay."
Mm-hmm.
And and that was amazing. So I guess when I started wanting to be a stand-up when I was about 12.
Mm-hmm.
But But its first time, I guess, would have been when I was at uni, when I was 17.
Mm-hmm. What year was that?
1993.
So you're coming up to like this year's like 30 years of doing comedy, I guess?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I had my first paid gig on my 19th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess 2 years' time will be my 30th professional anniversary as a professional comic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, unless you count the carton of beer
Yeah.
as pay.
Yeah, that's a payment, I guess.
Well, in that case, yeah, I've been a professional comedian for 30 years, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, never had a real job, despite the reflective jacket. I feel like I'm doing like real man drag whenever I wear this.
Appropriating tradie culture.
Yeah. But who doesn't want to be visible? I think it's just a safety thing, you know. Because you're more visible to motorists, yet less visible to just general people. You're just another person in high vis gear.
Yeah, maybe just carry around a ladder as well. You blend in perfect.
Yeah. You're like
You can get in anywhere.
an NPC for some people,
Yeah.
and the only real person for another category of people.
Mm.
Anyhow, yes. So that's a very long answer to that very simple question. Yeah. When was your first gig?
2021. I did it back in Mackay, yeah.
Really? Wow, you're doing really well. You're doing really well for only 2 years in. Yeah.
Yeah, cheers.
Good on you, Pete. Yeah.
Yeah, giving it a crack.
Giving it a crack. Yeah, but you started relatively older. You were like 23 or something?
Yeah, 23, 24. Yeah, I'm
24.
26 now, yeah.
You did some like bullshit jobs in Mackay.
Yeah, I've done some bullshit jobs.
Yeah.
A lot of retail kind of stuff. So,
And what was your degree in?
digital media.
Digital media,
Yeah.
of course.
So,
Well, you should have some kind of videotape podcast, some kind of vodcast or something.
yeah, I guess this is what I'm trying.
Some kind of
trying to do.
online
Yeah,
thing,
Yeah,
yeah.
some kind of online thing. Yeah, not using the degree otherwise. So.
Yeah. Did you learn how to edit and all of that kind of
Yep.
stuff?
Yeah, edit and edit, a little bit of animation, like a bit of photography, a bit of everything. Like it was quite a broad degree, which made it a little bit difficult because there's no like kind of straight like this is what you're gonna do. It's like so I have to as I'm doing the degree be like fuck what do I want to do.
Well, everyone kind of has to be their own like. Everyone has to, like in today's, unless you've got a serious amount of money behind you, everyone has to be a kind of an all-rounder, don't they?
Yeah.
You have to be able to promote yourself. You have to be able to be in charge of your own online presence. You have to be able to edit, and pretty much everyone's an auteur. Which, you know, when I was young, you could be much more specific. Like, you know, when I started working on the radio, I was just writing jokes for other people, and I got a living out of it. You know, I made $25,000 a year just to do that. You know, and you know, at the time that was added in with my stand up. I was doing really well. You know, I managed to develop quite a drug habit on that amount of money. Yeah. So how many episodes of this have you done?
This will be episode 13.
Oh wow!
So I'm trying to do it weekly.
And they're out. And they're in the
they're
world.
all out. Yep, they're in the world.
Wow, that's amazing. That's incredible. That's great. I'm slightly self-conscious. I don't know if I'm peaking or popping or anything because, like, I'm used to having headphones on to be able to monitor my voice. So my apologies if I'm not doing it correctly.
No, it should be fine.
It should be fine.
It's my fault if anything.
Yeah,
low tech.
Yeah, it gets me when I'm listening to podcasts and people are peaking. You know, because. You know, it was just drilled into me when I worked in the radio that you don't do that. You monitor yourself. You know.
Yeah. So you said you were writing jokes for the radio, but you're also an announcer as well.
An announcer, a broadcaster. Yeah. So I started out writing jokes, but I was also writing sketches and voicing them, and I was doing characters, impressions, all of that. I was doing street stuff, you know, all the kind of stuff that people do nowadays. I've kind of did in the audio medium. So I did like vox pop stuff. I did, you know, prank calls, going to press conferences and being rude to celebrities. You know, I was the sort of the idiot on the street. I did impressions of politicians and famous people and all of that stuff. Did that for 14 years. For the first 7 years, I wasn't really. I'd occasionally go on as myself. I'd do like one segment, but I wasn't, you know, I wasn't allowed to be on air as myself, for occasionally if the woman that I wrote for, Sammy Power, was sick, then they'd ask me to fill in. And sometimes I'd still be, off chops from the night before, and have to try and straighten up on air. So, I mean, obviously radio licenses cost millions of dollars, or if not hundreds of millions of dollars, and probably not a good idea to put a young drug addict on air in that position of responsibility. But at the time I was appalled that I wasn't, that it took me 7 years to get from being just the person who wrote and did sketches to being the co-host of a show.
Yeah. And was that your main goal in the radio, was to be a co-host?
My main goal was to do nationally syndicated Drive, and I never got there.
Yeah.
I had 7 years of co-hosting Breakfast in Brisbane, which is pretty good as far as the gig's concerned. I was very, very, very lucky to get to that stage, but I didn't get to the dream because of my various character flaws and addictions and lack of motivation, and as it turns out, being neurodiverse. So, I did pretty well considering how fucked up I was. But I was also, incredibly lucky. But I didn't achieve all my dreams. I achieved all the dreams that I had as a 12-year-old. I managed to go to LA and do shows at the Improv, and I did stand up on TV. I did stand up on every free-to-air network in Australia, and I did stand up on the Comedy Channel, and I had I had a long career in radio. 14 years is a long career, and it's a long time, especially to stay in essentially the one time slot and the one station was a really long run. And looking back, I was stupid to do that, because you only make more money if you go to somewhere else. I did make more money incrementally over that time, but I would have really maximised my earnings a lot more if I'd gone to another place. But I was so tired and so focused on for the first 7 years of my career, finding and using drugs. So I was either working or finding and using drugs. And then for the last 7 years of my career, I was just swamped with being a new parent and trying to be a partner and a father, and failing pretty miserably at it. But so I've had a lot of luck in my life, a lot of fantastic luck. Yeah.
With the radio stuff, so when you're in the radio, were you balancing doing gigs and stuff like that too, like the stand-up as well?
I don't think that anyone would ever look at my life and say that I was balanced. I did gigs compulsively. I loved doing shows so much, but I didn't really have any social life outside of stand-up, and I certainly, like I was a late bloomer. I didn't have a girlfriend until I was 24. Didn't have sex until I was 25. So, a long time. I had a long time early on where it was, from about when I was 12 to about when I was 20, my focus was pretty much solely on stand-up. And then from about 20 to 25, it was comedy, showbiz, drugs, and sex. And then from 27, it was sort of, family and trying to work out how to live without drugs and failing for a really long time. And in between that, a fair bit of suicidal ideation. So I did pack in a lot. I packed in a lot of depression and poor choices in that time. But yeah, so but I just I think with a lot of people, like the failure in stand-up, when you fail as a stand-up, it's very personal.
Yeah.
Like it's not as, like, the stakes aren't as high as failure in a lot of jobs. Like if you fail as a bus driver, that's pretty bad. Like if you fail as a pilot, that's pretty grim. If you fail as a heart surgeon, that's very bad. If you fail as a lawyer, there's consequences for people, you know. If you fail as a construction worker, could be, really bad consequences for you. Or, if you fail as a tree lopper, then that's pretty bad. But the failure as a stand-up comedian is about who you are, and it's kind of a failure that's very hard for nearly anyone to cope with, because I had someone say once that most violence is, at the root of most violence, is humiliation. I think humans associate humiliation very directly with death, because for most of our evolution, to be humiliated meant rejection from the group that sustained you and enabled you to live. So we have a really strong aversion to the kind of humiliation that happens as a stand-up comic. It feels really bad. And for people who are kind of mentally healthy, that really bad feeling makes you think, well, I think I might not do comedy. Or at the very least, it's going to take me a couple of months until I feel like I want to do comedy again. But for me, I felt that bad all the time as a base level. I was either suicidal or fantasizing about how incredibly successful I was going to be. So when I failed, that was pretty standard. And when I did well, that was a very brief break from feeling the way that most people would feel when they did really badly. So essentially, when I did badly at a gig, my first instinct was to see if I could do another gig that night or another gig the next day. And most of my friends who were at least as smart or as talented as me would do the gig and then feel either, I don't think this is worth it for me, or I have other things that I enjoy just as much that don't make me feel this bad. Or I have things that are obviously going to make me more money and get me more status. So they might have a bad gig and then maybe come back in a month or 2 months or 3 months, just on the off chance that there'd be a better gig. And by that time I'd be 40 or 50 gigs better. And they would go, oh, well, I'm never going to catch up to how well Greg's doing, or the other psychos like me, So, yeah, that was one of the few examples in my life of my obsessive, compulsive, excessive, unbalanced, psychologically unwell nature working out quite well for me. It's pretty much the only time that's worked out well for me. But yeah, I think in order to get good at doing stand-up comedy, you have to be obsessed and you have to be pretty impervious to the distress that it takes, because it takes a really long time to get to the professional level at it, and it takes a lot of discouragement, and pretty much no one is going to come up and say you should really stick at this, you know, because most people justifiably realise that you'd be better off doing pretty much anything else. Most people, most of the time would be better off doing pretty much anything else other than comedy. But if you can do it at a high level, just for me personally, I've found it immensely rewarding. But but maybe I wouldn't if I could do anything else. Who knows? Who knows?
And I think, as you said about, I think also because humor is so baked into who we are as people, and it's when you don't get that immediate response of laughter, you're like, I'm not funny. They don't think I'm funny. And it is a personal,
especially when you value being funny so much that you choose to make it your artistic expression and your career.
Yeah.
There's that nice quote from Patton Oswalt where he says that people do comedy in order to control the circumstances in which people laugh at them. I think most people who are professional comedians are people who would be laughed at anyway. We're just odd in some way. So we sort of work out how to be able to provoke that laughter so that we have some kind of control over it, Sort of like, people who are very angry and have violent urges probably should learn how to fight, because otherwise they're going to get badly beaten. So if you're going to be ridiculed, you should probably learn how to be deliberately funny so that people have some respect for you, where they go, oh, that person has some power. They have enough awareness of themselves and how they're perceived to be able to use what would otherwise be a negative as a positive. Yeah, but it's still really. Vince Sorrenti, who is I'm an old comedian. He's an even older comedian, but he has had an excellent, very successful career. When I was young, I asked him if you ever stop dying, and he said, "You just suck for more money." And it's true. You just suck for more money, ideally.
Yeah.
Or you could suck for the same rate of pay that you were getting paid 30 years ago, which I've done.
That being said, though, comedy, when you have the good nights, though, it's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah, that first time that I did stand up before Vince, it was looking, if someone had filmed that, I'd watch that and I'd go, oh, wow. If I watched that today for the first time since that happened, I'd watch it and I'd go, yeah, that was not a good gig. But at the time, I just felt like someone had walking back to my room on campus, I felt like someone had cut the top off my head and was spooning my brain into the universe. It was the most profoundly joyous moment of my life until then. Like, since then I've had kids, you know, and still a lot better than having children. I love my kids. They're the best things in my life, but nothing touched that moment, you know. Certainly no drug moment, you know, because I was high on my own endogenous chemical supply, as well as a feeling of, oh, well, this is something that I can do, and this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time. It was a feeling of achievement and external validation that, yeah. And that's the first hit that you get that you chase ever since. And know, like, I've done much better gigs, much more high profile gigs, but that opiate-like rush that's never going to happen again.
Yeah, I feel that. My first gig was like that, where I did well. And it is that, like, oh my God, I'm doing the thing that I've been wanting to do for so long. And to even not just like, to not bomb on the first time doing it too, and actually be like, okay, I have something here, is like... Yeah.
That first time is the heroin, and the rest of the time is just, you know, methadone. Yeah, but, you know, like, ideally you get to a point where it doesn't... Like, ideally you get to a point where it doesn't cost you too much emotionally or physically or financially in order to do it. And, you know, the times when you fail are less destructive to your psyche. The times when you succeed don't send you off into, you know, being... too egotistical, and you just enjoy it on a kind of a more mellow, sustainable level, and you are able to be incredibly grateful to the people who come, and you give them joy, and you're grateful to the people who put on shows and book shows. And you give them joy, and you're easy to work with, and so all of those things, you know, ideally, and that takes a long time to work out, and then you die.
You do comedy, then you die.
yeah. But there's some happiness in between. Yeah.
So you did the talent show for uni and won a case of beer. Then from there, what was the progression with the stand-up? Like, what gigs and stuff were around?
So Mike Van Acker came and did a disastrously difficult gig at the uni club. Someone with no idea booked him. Poor Mike. He's such a great performer. And a nice guy, came and died in the arse during the day at the USQ in Toowoomba, and he had the presence of mind and the kindness to talk to me afterwards, and he gave me Fideli's card. Fideli Krishy, the guy who runs the Sit Down Comedy Club, and I called Fideli, and he gave me my first spot in Brisbane, which was at Bob's Comedy Cafe, which was at a venue at Breakfast Creek Wharf. Which I think is now a Mercedes dealership or something like that. something that's been knocked down or whatever. So I did a spot there, and Paul Brash was the MC, and I didn't suck. And then the second week, I was still at uni. Second week, I did Bob's Comedy Cafe and Dockside, and the Sit Down Comedy Club when it was at Dockside, and it was just a really fortunate time to start doing stand-up in Brisbane because Brashy had been doing street performing. He started doing juggling and street performing at Expo 88. And then he went off to Canada and started doing more stand-up sort of stuff. I think so. And John Atherton had just sort of been drawn to it. Jimmy Poulos had done it. So there'd been things around. Fidelli started doing theatre sports in high school, and then he and Roger Beams started doing theatre sports and stand-up, and Tony and Jenny from Kubler Auckland went, well, this, because they were acting agents, they thought, well, it would be good to have, there would be synergy with, getting stand-ups who might be good for film and TV stuff, and also people who did theatre sports as well. So I think that's from what I could work out. So Fidelli was much chubbier back then. I was a fat kid. He's only a few years older than me, but he was much more grown up than me. He was already running a business. And he helped me out a lot. There were audience. There was an audience. It was just after. It was at the end of the Sir Joe period, in Queensland. So, it had been for a long time. Queensland had been very repressive. Like Billy Connolly and Rodney Roode had been arrested for public indecency and not public indecency, profanity.
Yeah, I read about that recently, actually.
Yeah, I talked to Rodney about it, and I interviewed Billy about it as well on the radio. I talked to Rodney about it privately, but about them getting arrested in Brisbane. And so it was in the early 90s. It wasn't that far beyond that. Like the Fitzgerald inquiry was in 1989. So there was the fact that there'd been comedy, old school comedy, but it tended to be male only smokers, and doing sort of old school stand up. My wife kind of stuff. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking, like my ex-wife or my wife type stuff. Yeah,
Ugly Dave Gray was, and I later on when Dave Brown was running Dockside, Dave Gray did a set at Dockside, and I had immense respect for him as an act. Like he had great timing and and presentation wise, he was a really skilled comedian. And I don't know whether, I don't know what proportion of those gags that he did were old gags that he'd been doing so long that they were gags that he'd written that he'd been doing so long that they'd become old gags, and how much were just what they used to call stock material.
Yeah.
Back in those days. But, new wave comedy, like the stand-up that had sort of kicked off in London and New York in the 60s and 70s, and got into Melbourne and Sydney in the the 70s and the 80s, made it to Brisbane in the 90s, and there was a real explosion. There were, like, at Dockside, there were 3 nights a week, there was 192 seat capacity, and quite often that'd be full with paying customers who were right up for it, and at Christmas time there'd be double shows on Friday and Saturday night, so nearly 400 people coming through, paying good money to see shows. So it was a great time. People still smoked inside. It was weird, like all sorts of stuff. And then there'd be people smoking inside, and then the comedians would go out onto the river at Dockside. It was a really beautiful setting, and there'd be 5 or 6 joints going around in a circle out the back, and lots of goofiness, and it was a special time. I guess everyone feels that way about when they're starting out, when they're young. But it was a very, I look at the path that comics have to take now in Brisbane, and there's so much more competition. There were lots of people who were good starting out then, but there's a factor of 2 or 3 more people doing it now, and the level is that much higher, the standard is that much higher, and people who are quite good will stay on that sort of open mic level for a lot longer. And the only way it seems to progress is to do your own shows and create your own following, which I wouldn't have been able to do. I was too drug fucked, and B, I'm too neurodiverse to get that sort of shit together. I was extremely lucky that there was a system in place where if you were good, you would go from doing 5 to 10 to 20 to MCs and feature supports to headlines. And I was able to go through that and be a headliner within 4 or 5 years, which is very fast comparatively. Most people these days, it seems to be a 7 to 10 year thing to get to being a headliner, because there's so many there's so many people, right? When you think about it, there's only 50 weeks in a year.
Yep.
And, there's people who started with me and started before me are still around, and they're still good comics, They're still good comics, they're still relevant. And they're taking up 20 or 30 weeks of the year, and then you've got interstate and overseas acts taking up other weeks of the year. So it's really difficult. It's difficult for the people who run rooms to be able to give spots to everyone, So yeah, it's but I'd like to think that I'm a better comic now than I was 10 years ago. But there's a finite lifespan to being a comedian in certain circumstances, But I've been terribly unhealthy in my life, so the chances are that I'll die before I get to the end of that window.
Positive? No.
Well, just realistic, I've made a lot of silly mistakes, made a lot of bad choices.
Back then, were there many open mics too? Do you think now it's probably, there's also like probably more opportunity for us starting out now to get up on stage?
There's certainly a lot more shit gigs. There's a lot more terrible shows to do. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I was always very keen. I was very ambitious. I was annoyingly ambitious and money hungry from the very beginning. Yeah, there are more gigs to do for sure. But I think that can lead to kind of a... I think that I've noticed with some of the comics in their mid to late 20s who've been at it a while, that they kind of become a bit jaded and cynical because so many of their gigs are to 15 or 20 people. You're kind of mainly playing to the comics at the back of the room. Whereas when I started, a lot of my gigs were to 200 or 300 people.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and 200 or 300 people who had paid, a decent amount of money and were having a night, they were having a night. And as the younger comic, you were getting on in that cherry sort of spot, and it was proper showbiz, But that kind of doing a lot of rooms that are kind of low key leads to a different kind of comedy. It's equally good. In fact, to my tastes, it's probably better, but maybe not to the general public.
Yeah. Do you mean it leads to, someone becoming a bit more cynical on stage? Is that what you mean? Or
well, yes, cynicism and irony and that's why if anyone can come at comedy with a feeling of excitement and joy, they're always going to stand out. Because, at the level of paying $50 for a ticket to go somewhere, people like to have that feeling of excitement and joy and and cynical detachment is fine for free. If I don't put much effort into my night of diversion or entertainment, or my scrolling on a social media platform, which I won't specify because if this is going to have any lifespan, then I'll just date it. Then sure, cynicism and irony is fine, but if people have put in an effort, then I think they want some kind of reciprocity.
Yeah.
They come into things with an energy, and they want that energy reflected to them. And also, think about how stupid the average person is. Like, 30 or 40% of people are stupider than that. So if you come at things with a level of detachment and irony and I'm above it all intellectualism that is appealing to us and other comedians, then you're cutting out lots of people who, by the way, also have money and because they're stupid, are easier to get parted from their money. They will buy stupid shit off a comedian because they're drunk and they're not very bright and they don't think about the future much. They're a fucking good audience to have, or at least be able to perform to. Not your audience. Your
No,
audience.
not at all. No.
The people who are watching this are very, very smart.
Yeah, high intellect.
A high intellect, yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, like if you're going to have a career, or you know, but it's, you know, look, there's, you know, going into the as things are now, and as we get more as the algorithms and the artificial intelligences become ever finer and finer tools for getting people the exact kind of entertainment they want, then more and more people will be able to have careers where they engage largely with people pretty much like themselves. And it used to be the case that you would be young early on in your career and you would go onto some kind of larger platform, and because you were young and somewhat cutting edge, out of that larger platform you would get a smaller following that you would take through your career with you. Either that would happen if you were lucky, or you became the kind of performer who could kind of just be okay in front of most audiences and just work around a lot of different places. But now there might be more and more is the case that there are people who are quite successful and largely unknown, never even had the chance of being on a broader platform, but through you know, digital means have found exactly the audience that they were always going to get, and in a way that's amazing and that's incredible, and the best art will come from that because people will truly be themselves, and in a way that's awful, and for the performer it means that they'll just end up disappearing up their own asshole.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I guess like that can be a little bit of issue with like the online creators where they're creating content before they do stand up, then they go into wanting to do stand up, and they already have an audience there that's gonna eat up anything they kind of say anyway. Yeah.
It's sort of like I don't know if it even needs to be an issue, I guess. Like, I don't know. You know, being a hardened, diverse comedian, maybe that just means that you're just never going to really make anyone happy, you know. I don't know. Whenever I work with a great, funny woman, you know, I just hear women laughing in the audience at them in a way that I know that I'll never make them laugh. Like, I'm a good professional comedian, so women find me funny. But when I'm working with my friends who do stuff from the point of view of being a woman, I hear women laugh at them in ways that are just really free and deep and guttural, you know. I'm amusing to women, but I don't get them to really lose their shit in the way that my friends like Mandy Nolan and Ellen Briggs and various other women that I've worked with do, you know. And that's half the population. That's, that's half the population. So, you could be the kind of comic that only men go to, but those comedians are awful. No, they're not. They're not awful, but I remember hearing Stanhope talking about how he was walking to one of his gigs and he saw these people that he was just appalled by, and he started to cross to the other side of the road because he was afraid of them, and they were his fans on the way to his show. So, it's I think through my life, the various things that I have with me, because I have these problems with addiction, right? I need to get help from other people who understand what it's like to be, fucked in the head in a similar way to me. And that means that, and through that, because we've all got this common problem, I've met people from very different backgrounds to me, like a lot of people from very, very poor, disadvantaged backgrounds, and some people from very, very wealthy backgrounds. But we need to help each other because we're fucked in the head, and we're the only people who understand how and why we're fucked, So I try to take that into stand up with me. I think a lot of stand-ups have the point of view of, I'm just going to do what I do, and if you don't like it, I don't give a fuck. And that's valid. Like, that's fine. I appreciate people who have that point of view, but I spent too long as a nerdy, friendless kid to ever have that point of view. I want to try and find the common humanity with everyone. I want to be able to do shows for everyone. And I don't want to have someone go away from one of my shows feeling bad about themselves or bad about me.
Yeah.
That happens. It has happened. I've had people I've experienced death threats. I've had people threaten violence against me. I've had people wish that I would die or kill myself. And that's with the attitude that I don't want to do any harm.
Yeah, because I have a similar attitude and approach to comedy too, where it's like I actually don't want anyone to feel, walk out and be like, oh, I feel kind of shit or whatever because of what it like. For me, it's like not really about being like cancelled. It's my mentality is, I just don't want to I don't want to ruin anyone's night or whatever. And obviously, you're still with comedy, you're still pushing the line and stuff. But one of the only times I've ever had people walk out during a show I was on and get upset at me, I was making fun of Triple J. So it happens. No matter what. There is a point where it is like, you can offend anyone by anything too.
Yeah.
So
Oh, but like I'm offensive to some people just by existing. Like and that's what, I'm self-obsessed, I'm self-absorbed. It doesn't help me or anyone else to feed into that. Like I'm naturally self-obsessed and self-absorbed. So the less I feed into that, the better. But I'm an old, fat, straight white guy. Every time I step on stage, there's gonna be someone who's been horribly abused by someone who looks like me.
Mm-hmm.
They're just not gonna dig my vibe.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably people who listen to me say dig my vibe and would just had a visceral reaction of hatred. Just by the simple fact of thinking, the fucking temerity to go, I'm going to stand on a stage and talk is enough for some people. Like, I only got to the point of thinking I should be on stage talking because I'm unhealthily self-obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be at least one or two people every time I go on stage who are equally fucked in the head, who are just upset that they're not the person currently talking on the microphone. But when you come into, specifically any time that you do material that in any way questions or confronts or subverts the things that people take into their body and into their mind very early in their life, then there's a real chance that they will react violently against you, because a good joke about nationalism or militarism or religion or the structure of society as we live in it, or basically any of the stuff that your parents or your grandparents taught you when you were very young, if a person hasn't gone through the process of questioning that themselves, then if you do a good piece of material about that, they're going to experience cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is very, very uncomfortable. And often they can only react to that discomfort through violence, which is why I'm very cowardly about when and where I choose to do that kind of material, because above all else, I don't want to be hurt. I don't want to be physically hurt by people. So I only do those jokes in situations where I'm pretty sure people have had the same thought. Now, if that material is recorded in some way and goes out on a digital platform, then it's possible that people who violently disagree with what I say are going to know who I am. And because of the nature of my life, they're going to know that I'm going to be at Nunda the Sunday after next, and they could turn up and have a violent word with me. So that's why I'm very careful about what material is published about me. What material I do and when it's published. However, most people, if they disagree with me, are just going to go, well, that guy's fat and he's fucked and he's old and he's a drug addict, so why would I even bother being upset about that piece of shit's opinion? Most people, even if they disagree with the person, aren't going to be that upset. But there's always that, there's always that example that happened to me where, you do a joke on the radio and someone comes in and throws a pot plant at the receptionist.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Jesus.
And the radio station gets plexiglass up in the reception area because I wrote a joke.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I think a lot of that, like, the audience having a violent reaction or that kind of come back into the line, or it was like a point of discussion maybe like last year about the whole Will Smith thing as well.
Yeah.
I know people were worried if it was like setting a precedent, but it sounds like it's always been like something in the back of your mind. So
yeah, it's always been there.
Yeah,
it's always been there. It's you'd have to be a pretty stupid person to not be aware of it.
Yeah,
like it's there's a reason why you park your car close to the gig. You always know where the exits are. Most of the time when I do a show, I'm fucking out of there at the end of it. Yeah. Like, not because if I had merch, if I had something to sell, then I would hang around because as much of a coward as I am very avaricious. I am a greedy fuck. So I would put up with the threat of being beaten up if there was, $50-$60 worth of merch sales in it for me.
It's crazy to me when seeing some people that have, like, on my level, through the open mic scene when they do crowd work.
No one's on your level.
When they do, like, crowd work and stuff, how they get, like, some people get, like, they might have a crowd member that's, like, quite aggressive and they'll keep going, and I'm like, don't keep going.
No.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that some people just, like, will just not care about that and just kind of might keep picking on that crowd member or whatever. I'm like, well, that's because that's another thing altogether. It's like, because that crowd member, you take away that level of like, oh, they were offended by that thing you said. You're directly talking to them now.
Yeah. I didn't do crowd work for the first 15, 20 years of my career. But when in Sydney in the 80s, it's difficult for comedians who start now to understand how different comedy was from city to city back 30, 40 years ago. Because most of the visiting headliners in Brisbane were from Sydney.
Yeah.
And Sydney was doing gigs in Sydney in the 80s and 90s was really rough. Like it was a really rough place to be. And when I first went to Melbourne after having done gigs in Sydney, I was just amazed by how nice the audiences were, how they would let someone just fucking ramble for 5 or 10 minutes with no discernible jokes and just sort of go, this is a story. Whereas if in Sydney, they would have had a stubby thrown at their head in that time,
Yeah, wow. Because to my understanding, it's kind of the people talk about Sydney that way now. It's like you can kind of get away with not telling jokes and stuff.
Yeah, I don't. Well, it's like I don't know if I was going to say I'm out of touch. I doubt if I was ever actually in touch. But yeah, it was. It was definitely the case of fucking tell the joke because people lived very stress-filled lives in Sydney, and but now, like in Sydney and Melbourne, like you could pretty much, like cities are so big that like you could do you could be a kind of comedian who only does sort of inner city, sort of lefty type rooms, and you could be a kind of comedian who only does sort of outer suburban, sort of less intellectual type rooms, and never really sort of mix it up, you know. You could be the kind of person who does the western suburbs of the East Coast exclusively and make a living. You could be the kind of person who only does the inner cities of around Australia and make a living, you know. And both of those kinds of comedians viciously attack the other kind.
Yeah.
And I want to work in the outer suburbs and the inner city.
Yeah.
And I'm friends. I try to be friends with both of those kinds of comic. But, you know, like I'm an old straight white guy, so I've got old straight white guy friends who sort of say, oh, you know, if they rail against cancel culture. And I just like, I don't really think, like, you know, I get out and I do a lot of gigs where I can tell that the people are a little disappointed that I'm not being racist or sexist. Still, you know?
Yeah.
I don't do a lot of gigs where I kind of have to apologise for being an old straight white guy. But I'm not going to make either group terribly happy.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to horribly upset either group, and I'll be funny enough that I'll be asked back. Is the goal, you know? I know I have people who go, well, I would feel bad about myself if I made a racist laugh, and I go, well, I'm not going to do anything racist, but I've no problems with taking racists' money.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, and it's funny because I look like the person who might, like, I get told a lot of racist jokes after shows.
Yeah.
Because, like, people just sort of like I can do an hour of material where I'm like, I don't do anything that I would think of as being right wing or racist or anything like that. Nothing even dog whistly, because in my heart I'm not that kind of guy. And people will come up and go, here's a joke for you. And I can just fucking tell. I can just tell as soon as they launch into it. And I just go, it's gotta go. Yeah. Yeah. Have you been told racist jokes? Like in that jumper.
In this jumper.
I wouldn't tell you a racist joke. But if you had your hair and beard and like, because you could totally be like a heavy metal Nazi. Or you could totally be
a barista.
You could totally be a barista, or climbing up, chaining yourself to trees, greenie. So, which is interesting.
Yeah,
but people don't come at you with racist shit.
No, not really.
That's good.
Yeah, it's probably for the better.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for? I guess it's such a broad question. Do you have any advice for comedians coming up at the moment, starting out?
Get a bank. Just start filming yourself and cutting up. This is advice that I'm not taking for myself, right? So film every gig that you do, and every time that there's a unique moment or a piece of content there that might be valuable in the future, cut it up and file it away. Don't publish it yet. Cut it up and file it away. Because when you are to the point where people are wanting to come to you for content, you want to be able to have a stockpile, a big stockpile, because when I was on the radio, I was in the position of having to feed a machine of content, and you don't always feel like feeding the machine of content.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if you have to produce content every day, you produce shit content. And it was okay for me when it was just the radio station, but when you're curating your own brand, you need some stuff in your back pocket for the days where your career depends on you having content, but you can't be fucked because you're going through some kind of crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So have a really large stockpile. I would suggest take the first 4 years of your career to build up a year's worth of content, and then in your 5th year of your career, start publishing your content.
Mm-hmm.
And don't eat into that stockpile, and continue in that habit of keeping content. Get a good accountant,
Mm-hmm.
because success, you don't know when success is going to happen. And when it does happen, you're never prepared. You're never prepared in terms of the amount of material that you're going to need, and you're never prepared in terms of the way that everything's going to change for you financially. Because, you're going to go from not really paying any tax or very much tax to suddenly having a really big tax bill.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to have all of that sorted. Get a psychiatrist, because if you do get successful, that's going to have a huge impact on your mental health, because often people who do get successful only get successful because they've been absolutely single-mindedly focused on this goal of success.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens because there's a hole that you think success will fill, and it never does. And when you get successful, that's when you get really sad, and the reasons behind your drive start to make themselves more apparent. So it's best to start working on that and have people who you can support, who can support you. If you don't have a routine for your physical health, do that, because if you're doing well, you might go from doing 100 gigs a year to doing 400 or 500 gigs a year.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, you need a lot of discipline. You need to be able to be healthy in that. Question your drug and alcohol use.
Mm-hmm.
And ask people who you love for feedback about your drug and alcohol use. Because if you get to the point where you're well known enough that people start buying you drinks and giving you drugs, if you're like me, that's bad news.
Mm-hmm.
That's really bad news. That's lethal news. So if you're a stand-up comedian, the chances are if you really want to do stand-up comedy, chances are you're neurodiverse, you're somewhere on the autism spectrum, or you have ADD. Chances are that there's some sort of significant trauma in your childhood. Chances are that you're obsessive and compulsive and excessive, and have the character traits that lead you open to being addictive in your personality. So just be aware of all that, because you know, I've had a lot of friends die. I've had a lot of friends die and quit showbiz, and you know, and you know, it's always it's quite often that the really talented, lovely people don't make it. There's a kind of you know, a lot of it's up to luck. And a lot of it's up to the ability to ask for help. Because stand-up's a very solitary pursuit, and we tend to be people who isolate. It's the kind of thing. Being able to be funny on command is very, very powerful thing to be able to do, because it gives the sense of connection. It makes people feel positively towards you, and allows you to feel in control, and it gives you almost a connection with someone, but not quite. And people who isolate themselves are very drawn to that. So, yeah. If you have friends who are your age who are also comedians, just make sure that you're very clear about who owns what bit. Just understand that that your ambition and their ambition are probably going to get in each other's way at some point, and just be willing to say sorry and accept apologies. Don't ever hit on another comedian. Don't ever make a sexual advance towards another comedian. I have friends who are comedians who are couples, and they're healthy and happy and stuff, but fuck, they're by far the minority. It is just so much safer to just keep the green room a safe space for everyone. You know, don't objectify anyone, and try not to be you know, like, we're kind of boundaryless people. We do sexual jokes, but you know, it's just best off to. You're going to have a long career, so just try not to fuck up on that front, you know.
Yep.
And, you know, probably don't do coke. Probably don't do cocaine, because it's very Moorish. And probably don't smoke ice, because I don't know anyone who says things really picked up for me after I started smoking ice. Probably don't shoot heroin. Don't do any of the new research drugs that I'm unaware of.
So we're not dating the podcast.
Just don't get a habit, because like I had a habit, and I worked overseas, and I took my habit overseas with me to death penalty countries. So don't do that. I'm only alive because I got lucky. You know, so don't do that. But you know, be grateful. Just be grateful for the opportunity to do it. And if you get a really good job, immediately start looking for your next really good job, whilst being very grateful to the people who gave you the really good job.
Yeah.
Don't stay in the same job for 14 years because, you know, the only way to make more money is to go to somewhere else. And, but, you know, young comedians aren't going to listen to advice. Like, they're all going to go out and do all that shit anyhow. Doesn't matter. If you're a young comedian and you're watching this now, there's a 50% chance that you'll be dead in a decade. If you're lucky. It's not a long life. It's not a long living career, you know. A lot of suicides, a lot of overdoses, a lot of... No, probably a decade. That's a bit short. There's a 50% chance that within 30 years you'll be dead or out of the business.
One or the other.
And you might as well be dead. Selling, fucking doing some sales job, living with your happy family in a house that you've paid fully for. What a miserable existence.
So I guess on that note, where can people follow you?
Yeah, I'm on social media shit, but sporadically. The dream is that one day I'll get my medication right and start posting stuff. But I'm doing a run of gigs with Anna Brennan. Sorry, that took me so long to remember her surname. Anna Brennan and I are doing a run of gigs starting next week. So you better get your shit together and publish this.
Oh yeah, it's coming out Wednesday.
All right. So we headed up the North Coast.
Yeah,
and
you're going to Mackay, my hometown.
Yeah, Mackay and Airlie Beach and Rocky and Bundy and yeah, a lot of great places. Great time of year to do it. And we'll be doing clean shows and dirty shows. So come along to those. We need money. And, you know, Anna will be doing all the promotion because she's clever and good at that. Yeah. Yeah. Next time, you'll get to talk.
Oh, no. It's all about the guests.
Okay. All right.
But, thanks for coming on, Greg. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.